Tonight, we will hear about their history, culture, and about some of the great Jewish institutions that once dotted the landscape of the Arab world.
It's totally old, as the view of Israel as solely a European project and a European society. It's also very much a Middle Eastern country consisting of citizens that are rooted in the Middle East.
And from that day, the Jew turned from an indigenous person who lived in that area in Mesopotamia between the two rivers for 2,600 years to a second or third class citizen. The story, this phase of my life started in 1963 when I was 8 years old. On that day, there was the Ba'ath Party came for the first time. And they asked every Jew to go and bring their ID cards, their nationality card, and queue outside a block of flats. The heat of Baghdad. And you queued for hours and hours, and when your turn doesn't come, the next day you come. This is what we queued for. A yellow ID, distinctly and exclusively just for the Jew. And from that day, the Jew turned from an indigenous person who lived in that area in Mesopotamia between the two rivers for 2,600 years to a second or third class citizen. So my ancestors, and the ancestors of probably all the Jews that you meet, came to this land after the destruction of the first temple in 586 before Common Era. They were taken captives by the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar, and were marched from Jerusalem to Babylon. And there they sang Psalm 137, by the rivers of Babylon. By the rivers of Babylon there we sat and we wept for Zion. And I always say when people now in the United Kingdom point out who is a Zionist, as if it's a dirty word, that Zionists started that day, 2,600 years, because they wept for Zion. My ancestors built a civilization. They wrote the Talmud. They formed what the Jewish nation today have: a siddur, a synagogue, prayers. It was all done in Babel. They changed the nature of Judaism from a temple-based, which was now destroyed, to a mobile form, which can be taken to the four corners of the world, and it did. It was taken to all the corners of the world, and that's how Judaism survived. We move this story now to the end of the 19th century, when the Alliance Française came to the Middle East. And by the time 1917 came and the Brits came over to occupy the land, Iraq, what is known today as Iraq, they find a Jewish community that is actually fluent in European languages. They control economy. And I want to tell you a figure that I don't think you will believe. 40 of Baghdad was Jewish. And on the Shabbat, or on the holidays, Baghdad would stop. There is no point in trading. There's no point in functioning. They just take their holidays with the Jewish holidays. The Iraqi Jewry then had their golden years. They participated in building Iraq, in every aspect: music, literature, commerce, trade, import, export, communism, Zionism, liberalism. They were part of everything. This changed in 1941. There was a pogrom, totally inspired by the Nazis. We call it the Farhud. That pogrom was the first sign that the bell has tolled and that the time that we spent there probably is coming to an end. Well, that pogrom targeted Jews specifically in the name of a final solution that they wanted to do on Shavuot 1941. It didn't work. But 1948, the establishment of the State of Israel, the Arab countries attack, the Arab countries do not succeed, part of the Arab armies, Iraqis, they come back and they take their revenge on the Jews. Which they did again in 1967 and in 1956 in Egypt. As a result, life became unbearable. And the Jew was seen as the fifth column, the enemy within. And in 1951, to 50-51, almost 93% of that wonderful nation of Iraqi Babylonian Jews, numbering 150,000 people, were displaced. The law allowed them 3 suits per man, 4 dresses, 1 ring, 4 books, and so on and so forth, and $20 almost. And so they were shifted, displaced, together with all the other Jews from the Arab countries to the young state of Israel, where they almost doubled the population, but obviously what history doesn't say is that, for example, my grandparents were put in ma'abarot, what they call, tents, for years, for many, many years, while their kids joined the new state, spoke Hebrew, went to army. I, the one who drank from the Tigris and the rivers, and the Euphrates, I, who saw this in my own eyes, I now watch my people being written out of the history of the Middle East. Totally. They never did. They never exist. They never achieved. Including in Israel. And I'm so grateful that recently, the last couple of decades, mistakes are being corrected. And our story now is part of the slowly making its way into the curriculum of the schools, as David mentioned. And I'm so happy that the Knesset in 2014 put a law making 30th of November a day so that we meet here. And I can tell you the story. And that story now is repeated, you know where? In every school in Israel, on the 30th of November. This is a very rich story. It deserves to live. We don't want to be the forgotten refugees. Is it time now for the Arab population to realize that the Jews who were living within them, who were indigenous, who did not come from Mars or anywhere else, they actually lived there and were kicked out of there. Can they find a way to accept that Israel is here to stay and that Israel represents that Jew that has always lived in the area, and that finally they take it away from their minds that there is a way of throwing everyone in the sea, or destroying Israel, or not mentioning the word Israel? Can we do that in my lifetime? The legal case for me being a refugee and recognized as a refugee, and I know that the ambassador will speak about the difference between how the Jewish refugee was treated, 856,000, and how the Palestinian refugee was treated. As far as I'm concerned, there are 2 sides of one coin. They suffered and we suffered. They need to be compensated, and we need to be compensated equally for the sake of justice.
Israel, when it was established, it was a poor country of 600,000 people. The number of immigrants who came just from the Arab states, and Iran, we have to say Iran is not Arab, so historically, it was 600,000. Only they doubled, but you have also people who came from Europe. So the country was poor, no help, but no one complained. Everyone was poor, but there was a mission. The mission was to absorb the Jews and create a state. And it was done. And today, thanks God, there is a very successful state, flourishing, and you don't know who is Sephardic, who is Ashkenazi. It's all mixed. It's one happy state. And I think that you compare the stories and you ask, how can it be? How can it be that all the power of the Arab countries around us, they could not settle 700,000 people, and the 600,000 Jews of Israel, who, by the way, 1% died in the War of Independence, or trying to defend the country, they were able, alone, with no money, with nothing, to absorb and create a successful and equal society.
وين يا قلوب وين لا تدين